to Vintage Diecast Restoration. Up for restoring this week is this model number 68 Matchbox Series Lesney Coach. So this is the Greyhound bus, Greyhound motor coach. As you can see, this model is not in great shape. Got a lot of paint loss, some oxidation on the original casting where that is. You can see our original, I think these are stickers, not transfers, are completely gone. We've got some suspension issues with our rear tires especially. This doesn't seem to want to set level. So this one is far enough gone that I feel like it's worth attempting a restoration on that. I think there's a clear line, and I try to, evaluate every model that I have in my collection, whether it's worth restoring or worth preserving. And there's a difference between the two. But for this one, I've got good glass. It's in decent shape. This is the yellow glass, which is the more common. I still don't have a clear glass in my collection. So this, I think, will be a great candidate for restoration. So to get this apart, to get us started, you can see there's two very small rivets in the back there that we're going to have to drill out or remove in order to take the base loose from the main body casting. In order to do that, I use just a small bench vise here, and in order to protect the casting, I've got this rubber mat, this little rubber sheet that I'll put in. So I'm gonna get that cranked down just to hold that secure. I don't want to go too hard on it because I definitely don't want to crush the sides or bend my casting at all. So the next thing I need to do is find a drill bit that's going to be the appropriate size in order to drill out those rivets. So if I look, got this one here. It looks like it might be big enough for sure, maybe too big. My next size down, I think I'm going to start with the smaller ones first and maybe work my way up to the larger. Typically, once I have finished drilling out the rivets on the bottom, all I need to do is just gently pry against there. I use this small little tool. Come in once on that side, once on the other side. Let's see, our base is loose. I can take that piece out. I'm going to be very careful with the internal plastics. See, these are really dirty, but they're intact. My little suspension piece for the axles is still there. Looks pretty good. My next step is to drill out these internal rivets that are holding the glass in place. Now I could do that back in my vise again, but I found that I really need more of a feel on these. And most of the time it doesn't take very much. It's just a few revolutions on my drill. So I actually prefer to do these by hand. And usually, if I get those right, and just lightly press on the outside, and my glass will come apart too. So our next step is to address our base and our wheels. I usually wait to take the wheels off until I remove the base. That way I'm not risking damaging the original casting at all. And so to take the wheels off, I'm actually going to use a method I've seen many restorers use. The one that I first saw it on was Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. And that is, I'm going to Dremel just the very edge of the mushroom post there, so that I can take the wheel off and slide the axle out. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the front wheels first. I always want to look, as you can see, this end of the axle with the half round, that's the original factory end. And this end was the end that was rounded. So I'm going to start on that end. I've got a small grinding stone. Now that we've finished grinding our last two posts, it's the same process. Just remove the wheel on one side, back the axles out of the base, and take the wheels off of the axles. And one of the things I do anytime I start a restoration like this, just so I can keep all my pieces organized, is I start with a little parts bin or a little Tupperware container that I put everything in so that I can keep everything that belongs to one model together. So the next step is going to be to strip the paint off of our casting and the base. So to get started, I'm going to take all of our plastics. I think, yeah, I can get that piece out. I'm going to put them in a bowl of just soapy water, just to soak a little bit. I'm also going to take all of my wheels, put those in there. My axles, these actually look to be in pretty decent shape. Not a lot of rust, so I'll probably just clean these up with a little emery paper and some triple-aught steel wool. So these I'm just going to set aside in my parts bin. And the next step will be to go ahead and get our paint stripper going on the casting pieces. So I've tried a few different brands of stripper in the past. When I really got into die-cast, I watched a lot of the videos from Bare Metal Hot Wheels and saw, the Aircraft brand stripper, and that's the first thing I ordered to do this. And it does work. It works very, very well, but it smells terrible. It burns if you get it on your skins or your skin of your hands. You really need to wear gloves. And so I started looking into some alternative, and this is what I found, this Citrus Strip paint and varnish stripper. This has very little smell to it at all. It still comes on a nice kind of thick, creamy stripper that really sticks well to the parts, and it smells like oranges, and it doesn't hurt your hands at all. I would follow the recommended use on the can by the company, but I found that when I'm using it and going through this process, that this is just a lot more pleasing product to work with, both from the fumes and the how hard it is on your hands or your gloves. So got that pretty decent coat, and now we're just going to let that sit, let the stripper do its magic. While I'm waiting on the stripper to work on the paint, I want to take a few minutes and see if I can clean up some of these parts. All I use is a little soapy water. I really like Dawn dish soap. It's got the grease cutting stuff in it, and so any of the bits that are on any of this that has a petroleum or a grease base, this seems to just really get it very clean very quickly. So I like that. Let's see, interior. This one just looks like it's just really dirty. I think everything is intact. Neither of our posts are broken off. Really all this needs is just a good cleaning, good scrub. And I use just an old toothbrush. If your dentist is like mine, I use an electric toothbrush, but every time I go to visit them, they give me a free toothbrush. So when I get home, that goes right into my Matchbox toolbox for future stockpiles. That looks pretty good there. On my wheels, there's really not much I can usually do with them. I do use a product that I think helps restore the shine on these, that I'll show you here in a minute when we get a little bit closer to reassembly. But usually a soap and some good soapy water does a lot to get the dirt out of all those little grooves in there. And that's really all we need. Our paint stripper's had a few minutes to set now, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the first piece and see how that looks. I've got a different toothbrush that I use to go with my stripper and my clean. Usually you want to try to keep those separate. And the first thing I'll start with is just kind of a scratch on it, rub to see. It's starting to get a little bit loose. One thing I have noticed with this product over some of the others, just because it's not so caustic, it seems like it does take a little bit longer for it to take effect. I gotta scrub at it a little bit more, and sometimes it takes 2 coats or 2 applications. All those things are things that I am more than happy to do, given the trade-offs of how much easier this is to work with. So I think we're gonna need probably one more coat of stripper on that. Let's see how our body is doing. One thing I've noticed, especially on these models that had a sticker or a decal, is this stripper in particular seems to not work well on those adhesives. And so if I had anything like that on the model, it seems to kind of retard the action of the stripper, wherever that was. This doesn't look like this has had hardly any effect on that. So this is definitely going to take a second coat. Some of those real play-worn areas where there was already quite a bit of paint loss, that seems to have cleaned right up with this, but these sides are definitely going to take another coat of the stripper. Next, onto our bust body. Again, I'm going to go with my stiffer bristle brush on this just to get it a little scrubby. That is actually looking really pretty good. Back to the Zamac everywhere. You can see we've got some spots, we've got some oxidation for sure on this, but I'm going to go ahead and rinse up these pieces and get them prepped for some paint. Now that I've got these all cleaned up, you can see that there's still a few little flecks of black paint in between the letters, and to go after those, I like to use this this is like a plastic bristled brush for my Dremel, and I put that on not full speed, maybe about 2/3 speed, and I'll use that to get in there. I know that brush is nice and soft, and it's not going to scratch the casting at all, so I can really go after it and get in between all those letters to get those last few little pieces of loose paint. So as you can see, it's got a bunch of them. I've still got a few little areas in there. The A's and the N's are always the worst, and I've got a set of dental picks that I'll go in to get each one of those out with. So in order to be able to hold on to these castings while I'm trying to paint them, what I like to do is take just a regular screw, and I apply a little dab of hot glue right to the end of that screw, and I pick an area on that piece where it's not going to show, and I just stick it on. So that'll give me now a piece that I can hold on to while I paint. It'll be out of my way. There's the second one. I'm actually going to stick this. I'm going to stick it right here, right between the windows. The other thing I do is I've got this 2x4 just with some holes drilled in it, so when I'm done painting, I can take my screws and drop them in there, and my pieces have a place to sit and dry in between where I don't have to touch them. So to mix up my paint, I first start out with, I got a whole package of these things, these little paint mixing cups. I got these on Amazon. I'll put the link in the video description. But this lets me measure out. It's got some different measurements molded right into the sides of the plastic there. Lets me figure out how much I've got. So that's one of my first things. These are the other things that I like to use for mixing my paint up, these little pipettes. These, I think I also got these on Amazon. I'll look and see if I can remember where it is or if I can find a link. But these sure make mixing and measuring a lot easier. So for the body of the bus, that's a silver, and I'm going to use a Testors brand metallic silver. This is, let me see if there's a number on this. 0611. So that's what I'm going to use for my silver. One thing you'll notice a little bit different on this, I like to use lacquer paints. I know a lot of the guys that are doing the restorations have gone to the acrylics. You know, acrylics are a little bit easier to work with. They're certainly easier to clean up because they're water-based. But I'm pretty positive that in 1955, when Matchbox Lesney was making these and they were coming out of the factory, they weren't using acrylic paints. So I'm a bit of a purist, I guess. The other thing that's a little different is you'll notice I do not use any kind of primer on my models. I've not had a problem just with a straight acrylic sticking, or a straight lacquer sticking to my metal. So I'm sure if I were using the acrylic paints, I would probably need to do a good primer coat on that in order to get my paint to stick. But I'm not. I'm using lacquer, and so I'm not going to do primer. You'll see as I mix these here, all I'm doing is I put a little bit of thinner in with my paint, and that's to get it flowable and make sure that it goes through my airbrush really nice. You can see to mix it, I just kind of suck it up into the pipette and squirt it back out. I do have a little electric mixer, a little mechanical mixer, and I found that especially on these metallic paints that have a little bit of that flake kind of suspended in them, sometimes I do have to go back and do the mechanical mixer, but this looks like it's mixing just fine. The other advantage that this gives me is when I get ready to load up my airbrush hopper, I can just suck up what I need, load up my gun, and then as I need more, I can come back, suck a little more up, and reload. So this is ready to go. So our next step will be to paint our model. I grabbed this. This is my clear spray lacquer, or clear top coat. This is also from Testors, so I know that it's not going to interact at all with the lacquer base that I'm using. But I'm actually going to wait to do the top coat here because this model has a decal that comes on the side here. So I'm going to wait until after we get the decals applied, I get my decal set on, and then I'm going to come back and clear coat this. So now we're ready to start our first coat on the base piece. Got my Tester Silver loaded into my airbrush. I do like to start out with just some lighter coats and build it up. My pressure maybe on my airbrush is different. I know I've seen a lot of restorers say, that they do one, they wait a few hours, they do another. I generally go real light to begin, but by the time I'm done working my way all the way around, my first coat is dry. So I usually just kind of do a continual paint, slowly building up those layers and rotating the model around till I've got even coverage over everything. And then once I get a good first coat, multiple layers stacked up, then I'll set it aside to dry for a while. For the base, I'm going to use Testors Gloss Black paint. The lacquers, I always have to shake them up a little bit, get them ready to go. Mix that with, again, anytime you're buying paints and things like that, I tend to try to stay in the same brand. I've had really good luck with the Testors stuff, so that's what I use. I know I've seen some of my international friends use Humbrol or some of the other brands that aren't available to me here in the States. But stateside, Testors is pretty long-standing, pretty reputable company, and I've always had really good luck with their stuff. So. still pretty watery. I think I actually want a little more paint than that. I want to get that too thin. If you get your lacquer too thin, it just drips and runs everywhere when it hits the model. It takes a long time for it to dry. I usually try to shoot for about a 50-50 mix. 50% paint to 50% thinner. And that does a pretty good job of still being flowable in my airbrush, but having a nice coverage once it hits the model. One thing I think I would do differently, I like these little mixing cups, and I know when I looked at them, there were other ones that had a lid that would snap on, and I thought, well, I don't need the lids, I'm only mixing. But a lot of times I do end up mixing up more paint than I need, or having a bit left over at the end, and instead of throwing that away, it'd be nice to be able to cap those. So I think if I ever order these again, I may look for a different link to share down in the description, but if I get another one, I think I'd like to put a cap on them. If I'm not mixing the colors, like this is still just a pure black, the beautiful thing about the lacquers is I can toss that right back into my bottle. That lacquer is eventually gonna, go off or evaporate, and I won't have to worry about it. So I'm gonna load up my airbrush here a little bit. Really don't think I'm gonna need very much just for this base piece. I'm gonna hook up my brush to my air compressor, get that pressurized, and we'll start on our base. Same thing as before. I do start out with a light first coat, but I generally just keep it moving, keep it rotating, come around until I've built up enough of a coat on it. So you can see that's our first coat on the base. I think I've got pretty smooth, even coverage through that. Looks like that should do us for this restoration. Also got on the main casting pretty good first coat of the silver. I'll probably do both of these with 2 coats. This one I can tell already I'm gonna have some sanding to do. I don't know if I didn't get some of it cleaned off as well. I did clean this with a coat of lacquer thinner before I started, just to make sure there weren't any oils on it. But I think, like I said, I can't tell if that's oxidation in the casting or if that is something that was stuck to it. But this is going to need at least one more coat on the silver. While I'm waiting for my paint to cure out, which will, it'll be dry almost to the touch by the time I'm done painting, but it'll take a few days for it to actually cure. So while I'm waiting for the paint, I thought I'd turn my attention to the axles. So this end here is the bird end that we removed. In order to clean these up a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the factory end and I'm going to put that into the end of my drill. Now you'll see I'm tightening this down just by hand because I don't want to crush that mushroomed factory in. So I just want it, you know, tight to the touch is all. And then I use a combination, instead of like a emery paper, I actually like just using an emery board, these disposable nail files. These are really great. They're easy to hold on to. They've got a heavier texture on one side, a finer texture on the other, and usually a quick once over takes off a majority of any corrosion on those. The other thing that I like to use is this quadruple aught, the super fine steel wool. And the reason that I start the way I did with the non-factory or the non-mushroomed end in first is I'm going to turn these around, and I can't go back, you know, and do this section if it's checked up in the drill. So I run them in backwards first, loosen that. You can see our mushroom is not crimped or damaged at all. I'll flip that around and put that other way the other end in. Again, just tighten it by hand. Use my emery boards. And I'll flip out to my steel wool. Now, as you can see, we've got all three of our original axles all cleaned up. Ends are all nice and shiny. These are ready to go back on our wheels. So next up, we need to clean up our wheels, and I'm going to share my little secret for making these things look nice and shiny and new again. So in trying to get our plastics in a little better shape than they were, there's a couple different products, different steps that I go through. On the wheels, I've seen a lot of different restorers do some different methods, paint washes, you know, doing a real thin down black paint over them, different things like that. I use this product. It's called Son of a Gun, and it comes in a squirt bottle. I put a little bit of that Son of a Gun just right on the end of a Q-tip, and what it is, it's a plastic restorer. It's made for automotive use, usually like dashboards, consoles, any sort of plastic that's in your car. And as those things kind of get sun-baked and aged, they start to look a little, you know, crummy, and you can come in with this plastic restorer, Son of a Gun, and you just spray it, and it instantly makes all plastic look shiny and new again. I've used it on a lot of my big cars before, pretty successfully, and so that's what I'm trying out on my wheels here, is that Son of a Gun plastic restorer. So again, I just put a little bit on a Q-tip and then kind of work it in to each one of my wheels, and I'll let those dry. My windscreens, all my windows, my plastics for this are not in great shape either. These are going to need some buffing. They were pretty scratched up even before we took it apart. You could see that those were pretty bad. So while I'm waiting for my wheels to kind of dry and let the plastic restorer do its thing, I'm also going to turn my attention to the windscreen. Now, this was not in terrible shape. You can see there's a tiny little crack or start of a crack right on that window. And the rest of this, it's just really scratched up. You know, the sides have, again, some scratches on them there. And I wanted to take a minute to talk about the difference between the different buffing wheels and things that are out there. So chances are pretty good. If you've ever bought one of these like little combination Dremel kits that have all the different tips and attachments in them, you probably got something like this in the tip. And this is a kind of a cotton buffing wheel. It screws on to one of these attachments that fits into the Dremel. And these are not what you want to use to buff this plastic. These are far, far too dense, far too hard. They're going to be too abrasive, and you end up just going to burn right through that plastic. What you need to do the plastic buffing is one of these. These are a very soft, very light material. I bought a package of, I think, like 25 or so off of Amazon. And you can see sort of the difference between these two, both in size and in density. This is really light, really fluffy, really soft. This is hard. This is really dense cotton on this. So these are not what you want to use. This is what you want to use. And I know there's several different suppliers. The first one, the one that was kind of recommended by one of the other restorers that I follow, wasn't available, so it took me a bit of hunting to find these, but these ones were in stock, so that's what I ordered. In order to get this plastic all nice and buffed out and get it to go back to clear, I've got my buffing wheel set up inside my Dremel. I'm actually gonna move these out of the way just so that nothing happens to them here. And you need a buffing compound on this so that you don't burn out your plastic. And I use on my Matchbox the only thing that I would trust on my Matchbox or on my big cars, and that's Meguiar's. This is their ultimate compound. This is formulated specifically for clarity, and so this is what I use, and it works pretty well. So to start, I'm going to put a little of I like to just take a little of the buffing compound just on my fingers, where I can really feel, just how much I'm getting. Kind of smear that around my plastics anywhere where I'm going to need to do some polishing. And on this one, I want to be really careful with this little flap at the end, because that's very, very easy to break off if I'm not super careful with it. And then I like to start my Dremel just on kind of a low to medium low speed to start working that in. And you'll see how soft that wheel is. It's not eating into that plastic at all, and that's really important. Just want to buff it. So now that we've got our plastic all buffed, the last thing I do is clean all the little fuzzies from the buffing wheel, get any remaining compound that might be stuck on it off, and just give it another little cleaning here with some soapy water. So all of our plastics are ready to go. You can see our wheels are dry. Our canopy glass has been completely buffed and polished. Our interior seating piece is all nice and cleaned up. I did go ahead and clean up this little suspension piece, even though nobody will ever see it or even know that it's there. And you can see this has a bit of a bend in it, and I'm going to try to correct that and bend that back to level, just to try to force those wheels down a little bit more. You know, these are bent up slowly over years of play, so I am going to try to fix that before I put this back together. And I'm going to try a method that I've seen done by other toy restorers, and that is I'm just going to put it in a little bit of boiling water just to get that hot, let that plastic relax a little bit, push it back to flat and level, and then let it cool. All of our axles are polished, ready to go, so now it's just waiting on paint to dry.